Hi everyone, my name is Harry, and today we're diving into another harrowing case. Monday, September 14, 2015, became unforgettable for 16-year-old Nolen Buchanan, marking the best day of his life. He had spent the previous Sunday with his girlfriend, starting with a traditional morning mass with her family, followed by a gathering with friends and a beautifully romantic evening. Waking up on Monday beside his beloved, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman, believing the world was at his feet. After all, he now owned Buchanan Construction. The young man was set to inherit cars, a house, land, and financial assets, and had made plans on how he would single-handedly manage the family business, determined to outperform his father, who had driven the company to bankruptcy. But, what could possibly go wrong? Already on October 1, 2015, Nolen Keith Buchanan was arrested at Bonita High School in Bonita, California, by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. Nolen was held at the Juvenile Treatment Center (JTC) in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty on 3 counts. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Thus ended his plan to take over the family business. Neighbors and classmates described Nolen as a model kid and a good student. "As far as I know, he was a good kid," Bonita High School student Campbell Ron later said in an interview. "He always cared about school, he seemed very kind. I was even surprised he was arrested." But what really happened in the Buchanan family? Let's break down this terrifying case in detail. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she applied for a job at his firm as an office manager. By the time they met, Adam was already divorced and raising his son Nolen from a previous marriage on his own. The cheerful, sociable blonde immediately caught the attention of the company's owner. The attraction was mutual. Molly fell in love, and their romance blossomed into a serious relationship, leading to her moving in with Adam. Molly dreamed of having a loving, close-knit family and tried to build a wonderful relationship with her stepson. Soon after, she became pregnant, and Gavin was born. People who knew the Buchanans claimed they were a fairly close-knit family of 4. The head of the family, who owned a construction company, earned enough to provide a comfortable life, and the family even purchased a vacation property in El Dorado County, California. The small cabin, located on 19 acres in Greenwood, had no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, took an active role in remodeling the house, and the family began to visit there frequently. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township in western El Dorado County on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found that the fire had destroyed 10 acres of property. A cabin located on the property was still smoldering, but had been reduced to ashes. The fire department personnel noticed charred remains in the debris. The scene of the fire was left untouched, and at 11 a.m., firefighters contacted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. No one yet realized the significance of what was discovered at the scene. Firefighters initially believed the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped in the house. However, the arriving coroner faced a daunting task. The remains of the house were still smoldering, making it impossible to examine the interior. They had to wait for the flames to die down completely and for the temperature to drop slightly. As the coroner began inspecting the house, he detected the sweet odor of burnt flesh and later found a human skull and a charred chest. It appeared that someone had lost their life in the tragedy. The officer called for backup, and officers from the sheriff's office arrived to conduct a thorough investigation of the scene. The conclusion was evident. The small, secluded cabin was not the primary residence of its owners, but rather a country retreat where people would vacation away from the city's hustle and bustle. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property adjacent to the cabin. They ran the license plates and identified the car's owner, who may have been the wildfire's victim. It didn't take long to discover that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by a man named Adam Buchanan. This man lived 160 miles from the scene of the incident, about 3 hours away, in Bonita, California. This information supported the police's assumption that the cabin was just a country residence for people vacationing from the city. However, it remained to be determined who was inside the house, Mr. Buchanan himself, or someone else. The owner's name gave detectives their first clue, which they used to begin their investigation. The Bonita police were tasked with checking if all members of the Buchanan family were safe and at home. They went to the listed address and soon found themselves in the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. After knocking on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage, Nolen, answered. He greeted the officers with surprise and asked what brought them to his home. The officers first sought to determine who was in the house, avoiding alarming the household unnecessarily. Perhaps the company car had been taken by someone from the company, not the owner. Nolen Buchanan stated that his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were expected to return that evening. According to Nolen, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet have sufficient reason to believe that the remains found in the cabin belonged to the Buchanans, but the information received, coupled with the discovery of remains believed to be those of two people by the evening of September 13, was enough to report the family missing in the El Dorado County fire. The next day, September 14, El Dorado County Police visited Nolen's home to speak with him in more detail and try to ascertain who had perished in the fire. They were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan, who said their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, frequently traveled there to do repairs. The parents were very concerned, as they had been unable to contact their son or daughter-in-law. From their account, the officers learned that the house was powered by generators, but at the time of the tragedy, it had no electricity. However, there were gas cylinders inside. This led to two theories: the fire could have been accidental or intentional. By September 15, the fire scene had cooled down enough for investigators to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. According to Detective James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, new remains were discovered that altered the course of the investigation. Police found a skull fragment with a bullet hole. At that point, we all realized this was indeed a homicide, not an accidental fire, the sheriff reported. The remains were collected and sent for forensic DNA testing. The first set of remains had a bullet lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull with the bullet hole, judging by its size, belonged to a child. The theory of a fatal accident was thus ruled out, and murder became the primary focus. There was no longer any doubt that the fire was set to cover up a crime. Investigators now needed to determine the circumstances under which the crime occurred. Was it a burglary gone wrong, or had the family been deliberately targeted? But by whom and why? Could the crime be related to Buchanan Construction, where Adam Buchanan was the president and COO, and someone held a grudge against him due to work-related issues? Initially, investigators focused on this theory. They also looked into Molly's life to determine if she had any enemies capable of such a crime. When these leads didn't pan out, officers turned their attention to the problems in Molly and Adam's marriage, of which there were many. Investigators learned that over time, Molly and Adam's relationship deteriorated, and by the time of the crime, they had been sleeping apart for some time. A diary was found in which Molly described the abuse she suffered from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described instances of rough treatment and abuse. According to them, Adam was not only harsh with Molly but also with the children. Molly's mother, Susie Slanker, admitted to investigators, "There were times I feared they would kill each other during one of their arguments." Despite this, Molly did not end her relationship with Adam, but would periodically take her son and leave to stay at her parents' house, only to return a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple enjoyed hunting in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, investigators theorized that during a heated argument, one of the spouses may have grabbed a gun and fired, and upon realizing what they had done, took their own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy stemmed from a conflict between husband and wife, then the instrument of the crime should have been found near one of the bodies, but it was not. Investigators speculated that the weapon might have been destroyed in the fire, and thus, did not appear as obvious as expected. For 5 days, forensic team members meticulously sifted through the ashes of the home, but their search yielded no results. No weapon was found. By this time, the forensic examination results had come back, confirming that the DNA from the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the possibility that they took their own lives. The absence of firearms indicated that someone else was in the house, a 4th person who had shot the Buchanans. The investigation had to start over. Police had no choice but to turn to the 16-year-old son of the deceased. Nolen told officers that the family had driven away in an old Dodge truck. According to him, his father decided to use the company vehicle rather than his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because he had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks to decorate the area around the country cabin. This was the same truck that police had found near the burned structure. When asked why Nolen hadn't gone on vacation with his relatives, the young man reiterated what he had said in the first interview: he had to stay home to look after the house and garden during his father and stepmother's absence. Nolen also mentioned a neighbor who grew illegal herbs on the edge of the Buchanan property, which led to frequent arguments with his father, who had repeatedly demanded that the neighbor stop planting the herbs and had even threatened to report him to the police. Talking about the family business, Nolen revealed that the company was facing financial difficulties. Things were not going well, the company was downsizing, and the number of employees had dwindled to 5. According to his father, the business's debts were growing rapidly. With this new information, the investigation had a lot of leads, and the detectives had a suspect, a neighbor. This was especially relevant because violent crime in that area was often linked to the cultivation of illegal herbs. Detectives believed that the threat of reporting to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. The problem was that no one had any idea which neighbor Nolen was referring to. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing homeowners one by one. This tactic proved successful, as they found a man who confirmed the story of a dispute with Adam over the cultivation of illegal herbs. However, according to him, after a heated conversation, the conflict was resolved. The neighbor had an alibi, and this version of events proved untenable. What remained to be explored was the financial crisis that had hit the family business. On September 18, the police visited Adam's company and interviewed the employees. Nolen's account was accurate: the company was on the brink of bankruptcy, with debts exceeding $30,000. As a result, some employees had been laid off, and it turned out that some of the former employees were extremely dissatisfied with the downsizing and could potentially be involved in the crime. That's when the investigators caught a break. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adam's construction company. It was there, on September 19, that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan was found under a bush, along with a .22 caliber rifle nearby. Detectives immediately went to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption: the perpetrator had killed the Buchanan family with the found rifle and, in an attempt to cover their tracks, had taken the victim's documents from the crime scene. The discovery was significant because it suggested that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family, then returned to Bonita to dispose of the bag and murder weapon. It appeared that the perpetrator was a Bonita resident. The proximity of the evidence found to the location of Buchanan Construction reinforced the theory that the boss was murdered by one of his disgruntled employees. Detectives sent the firearm and the bag of documents for examination, while also requesting a warrant to search the company's records and premises. Here, the investigators got lucky a second time. During the search, they gained access to a surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises. By sheer coincidence, the camera's lens was directed not at the company's property, but at the center of the parking lot. After this discovery, the case was just days away from being solved. Since it was already known that the family had left town on Friday, investigators reviewed the footage from that day and were surprised to see that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolen had claimed. Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately misled them. If the white Ford had towed the rock-filled trailer to the cabin, someone must have driven it back and parked it in the Buchanan family's driveway. Investigators re-interviewed Nolen, trying to keep him comfortable while extracting as many details as possible. Nolen again recounted his weekend activities, where he had been, and whom he had seen. Only this time, they asked him which movie he had watched at the cinema. how he had paid for shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. Nolen, unsuspecting, answered that he used his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search the Buchanan home in Bonita, examine the vehicles, and check financial records. The Ford was still parked in the driveway. Upon inspection, they noticed reddish soil clinging to the wheels, similar to the soil found in Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip last weekend or earlier, traces of soil might have remained, but they wouldn't have been as prominent. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the tire tracks near the country house, but the soil buildup indicated that the car had likely been to Greenwood recently. Detectives traced the bank card payments and found that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at a Taco Bell fast food chain on his way to Greenwood. Nolen, on the other hand, claimed he stayed home, did not accompany his parents, and had possession of the credit card. Detectives visited the diner and checked the security cameras, seeing exactly what they had expected: a white Ford, not a truck. When detectives searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th, which included not 3, but 4 drinks. Evidence collected at the fire scene similarly pointed to 4 drink cups. Thus, Nolen had indeed been in the car. The next credit card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club Bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes from the cabin. Adam's parents had previously informed detectives about the bar, mentioning that their son and daughter-in-law often visited it after working on renovations to the cabin. Security cameras recorded the time the couple left the bar, and traffic cameras along the highway helped track their route. A Ford F-150 headed towards the Buchanan cabin at around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and at 3:30 a.m., drove in the opposite direction. In the first instance, the camera captured Adam and Molly in the vehicle. In the second, only Nolen was seen. A few hours later, on Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used at 3 different locations in Bonita: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed that Buchanan only had 1 bank card. The facts contradicted Nolen's story. By this time, forensic results had come back. Nolen's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested right in the middle of a high school class. Nolen Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He tried to twist the story, claiming that his father had shot the family, after which he pointed the rifle at him. Nolen, in self-defense, took the weapon and accidentally shot his father. Nolen maintained it was self-defense, attributing the fire and subsequent lie to panic and extreme fear. That's why he took gasoline and set the house on fire to cover up the crime scene. The defense repeatedly emphasized Adam's abuse of his son and other family members to the jury. The medical examiner questioned this explanation because the bullet wound on a piece of Gavin's skull suggested a shot fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolen, however, claimed that his and his brother's beds were next to each other and that they were awakened by the noise and screaming. It was at that moment of awakening that Nolen allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at him, and Nolen miraculously managed to push the attacker away. Under this scenario, the shot would have been fired at about a 45-degree angle, which was inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution believed that Nolen shot his brother while they were alone in the house, while their parents were at the bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolen shot them as well. Based on where the bodies were found, Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolen then took the rifle, his parents' documents, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. He then returned home, met with his girlfriend, and spent the day with her to create an alibi. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolen guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Judge Kingsbury, while announcing the sentence, reflected on the verbal and physical abuse Nolen had endured and on the testimony that Nolen had killed his brother to spare him from the same horror or from being forced to live with what his father had done to him. But as she did so, she also cited the premeditation of the crime, the subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and the plans to run the family business that Nolen had discussed with family members. The judge mentioned Nolen's failure to follow rules and his deviant behavior, as noted by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where Nolen was held after his arrest. Everyone has the opportunity to change, Judge Kingsbury told Nolen. I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well, you will have a chance to get out on parole in 25 years under Senate bill and Supreme Court rulings. It's up to you whether you take that chance or not. Nolen continues to maintain his innocence. If he ever gets out on parole, he will have to pay substantial compensation to the victims. The exact amount of the payout is currently unknown. Thanks for watching, guys. Harry was with you. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss new stories from around the world. See you soon, take care.